guys, welcome back to another episode of the Whisky Diaries. My name is Malt Lane and we're here at Death and Taxes, and today we're going to be talking about the Benriach 10-year-old Curiositas. The history of Benriach is very similar to a lot of whisky distilleries in Scotland. They went through ups and downs, specifically a little bit of shutting down, a little bit changing hands and so on. And it was created in 1898 by John Duff. John Duff also created Longmore distilleries in 3 years prior to Benriach. Like many distilleries at the end of the 19th century, they went broke because of the collapse of the whiskey boom. The whiskey boom happened because of the phylloxera disease that actually killed basically the vineyards in France. Because of that, basically everybody started drinking whiskey instead of brandy. Obviously the Scottish and all distillers around the world took advantage of this, and they started producing more distilleries and more malt and so on and so on. And eventually in the 1900s, like basically the housing markets in the global financial crisis, people were giving more worth than it was worth, and the boom collapsed and a lot of distilleries went broke. Benriach didn't actually close down, but they were only producing whiskey and malting for Longmore during the first 40-50 years of the 20th century. Now, around the 1960s, it got taken over by Seagram's. In the 80s, it got taken over by Pernod Ricard. Pernod Ricard started using the Benriach still spirits for the blends and so on. So for a while there, in basically most of the 20th century, Benriach was only producing peated whiskey for blends and so on. Because of this, this actually turned out to be in the 21st century, turned out to be a plus for them, because Benriach now has a surplus of very rare casks and very weird casks as well. They have claret, they have marsala, they have South African wine, all these experimentations that they've been doing, and they're all over 20 to 25 years. So they do a lot of single bottling, similar to Glenronick. Now, Benriach got bought by a little group in the early 2000s that basically it was Glenronick, Benriach and Glenglassaugh. Then Brown-Forman in 2016 took over the whole, the three of them, and they haven't rebranding or anything like that. They just streamline it, and they just cutting down on a lot of the single bottlings, but they're making the staple, basically the flagships, very clear. So this one is one of them, the Benriach 10-year-old Curiositas. Any Benriach that has a Latin name on the bottle, it means that it's peated. Now, the peated on the Benriach is very different to the peated that you will get from something like Laphroaig or Lagavulin or something from the islands. It's not, doesn't have as much iodine and saltiness. The smokiness that come from the mainline is actually a lot softer and more like a campfire smoke, more than that iodine smell, like hospital smell, like Laphroaig. The 10-year-old is maturated in 3 casks: American bourbon, virgin oak, and rum cask. Now, this one in particular, virgin oak means that, so virgin oak usually gets used only for American bourbon. It's a part of the law to be able to call bourbon, you have to use brand new American oak that is freshly charred. That's in America. Scottish whiskies don't usually do this type of cask because it's very overpowering, and if you leave the whiskey for a longer period of time, it can basically just destroy the flavor of the whiskey. So it's used as a finishing cask, and just very, very sparingly. Now, the virgin oak and the rum cask is basically a finishes on this one. Now, the technical side of the distillery itself is they have 4 stills, 2 wash and 2 spirits. They produce about 2 million litres a year of whiskey, which is not a lot, but it's still quite a decent size. And they experiment with a lot of barrels as well. The new make spirits comes at 68% ABV, which is pretty standard. The fermentation is between 50 to 58 hours. 48 to 50 hours. So it's all quite standard, really. And to be honest, it's an underrated malt, Benriach. It's an underrated distillery. They just started to make a comeback in the last 4 or 5 years, but before that, it was quite like something like not many people, it's not like your Balvenie or Glenfiddich. Regardless of that, it's still a really great whiskey. So to try these ones, there it goes. So they produce a very, so the reason why they name it, as I said before, they put the peated whiskey and they put the Latin name is because what they're trying to do with this peated whiskey is just to represent what they were doing in the late 1800s. Basically when the distillery was first created, they're trying to replicate that sort of whiskey. It's a very Highland style of whiskey with lots of fruit on the nose. You've got lots of apples and pears, but then you got a little bit of that smokiness, which is really, really cool because you can actually, it's kind of like cooking apples and pears on top of a campfire or something like that. It has that poached apples, but at the same time you get that smokiness coming through. But there's no iodine or anything like that. Like I said before, it's just very different. Oh, that's delicious. At 46% ABV, which is, as I said, if you've seen any of my videos, I think 46 is perfect. That perfect balance of like nice, stronger than a 40 obviously, but you don't get to that cask strength that kills all the flavor, and you need a little bit of water, and you need to be in a certain mood. This is a everyday drinking and also very affordable. Here in Australia, this bottle in 2021 goes for under $100, so it's a great whiskey just to start. It's also a very, very good whiskey for a gateway to learn how to drink smoky whiskey if you're not a big fan of it, because the smoke is just very, very subtle. For what I read so far, this one in particular is 55 ppm, which is basically the same as Ardbeg or Lafroig, but because the smoke comes from the mainline, it's a lot softer and a lot easier to drink it as well. Anyway guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video and we'll see you next time. Salam Jabba.